out-of-the-ordinary insights. Brought to you by Investec Specialist Bank.
He began working as a janitor, cleaning offices at the age of 15. Today, he is the president and CEO of Africa for General Electric, a company that ranks at number 8 in the 2013 Fortune 500 list. CNBC Africa's Lindsay caught up with Jay Ireland at the World Economic Forum on Africa recently held in Cape Town.
Welcome to Captains of Industry. This week we speak to a captain of an industrial conglomerate which is in the top 6 companies in the world. It has 305,000 employees worldwide. It's in every single country and it has a multifaceted approach to its business. The gentleman's name is Jay Ireland. He's the CEO and president of General Electric in Africa. Jay, welcome to Captains of Industry. I've been looking through your CV. It's actually quite interesting because it's almost similar to mine, but very different, because you were in media and I'm now in media. I was in asset management, you were in asset management, but we did it a different way. Just give us a brief background to your CV history.
Well, I've been with GE for 33 years and been in a number of different positions in a number of different industries and businesses. And my last, since 2000, I was running our NBC television stations, our Spanish language network, and the NBC network operations. And then in 2007, I went to the asset management business and ran that through the crisis, which we managed the pension fund and the investments for the company. And then 2 years ago, raised my hand to come here in Africa.
So you put your hand up for this appointment. Had you ever been to Africa before?
No, nope. And we had, about 2.5 years ago, our CEO, Jeff Immelt, and the board decided to put a lot much more focus onto emerging markets. So they wanted to put higher level and more senior people in regional roles to really complement what the businesses in those regions were already doing, to really provide like a one GE approach. And so they've set up an organization. A vice chairman is the leader of that. He's based in Hong Kong, which is the first time a vice chairman's been outside the U.S. And we have leaders like myself in ASEAN, China, India, Africa, South America, or Latin America. And so when we set that up, I thought it would be a great thing to do from a standpoint of really driving change, really being able to help grow the company, but also help grow the countries that would be in. And Africa seemed like a kind of a exotic place. Hadn't been there. My wife
Was that your motivation, the exotic nature of Africa?
Yeah, it could have been. Yeah. My wife had been here in Kenya in safari, so she had sort of had a little bit and thought it would also be kind of fun. So I moved from New York City to Nairobi, which was a little bit of an adjustment. Culture
shock, I mean, it must have been extraordinary for you. I mean, the other thing that strikes me now is that you went from New York to Nairobi, as you've just said. You'd never been to Africa, your wife had, but also you've gone from broadcasting to asset management to your current role. Is it just the management skills that you've had that you can apply to each of those different areas, because they're very different?
Yeah, I think when you look at, I'm basically focused on the business end of things. So when I went into television, I wasn't going to produce shows or do the news or anything. It was more running the business. Same thing in asset management. I didn't pick the investments. We had professionals do that. It was more or less guiding the business through a pretty tumultuous time. And then here it's mostly growing the franchise, if you will. Making sure that our businesses are well positioned. Not just externally, but also internally. We understand what the risks are when we look at markets and projects, and continuing to focus on the growth of what we could do. So I would say it's more from that perspective.
I'm just going to I haven't got the mental capacity to go through the list of products that GE represents, but it's energy, it's appliances, it's aviation, consumer electronics. I'm doing it alphabetically now. It goes right down to the W's: water, weapons, and wind power. In Africa, what are the most important suite of products?
There's a couple. The oil and gas industry is a big one for us. We make a lot of equipment for the oil and gas industry, a lot of subsea assemblies that bring the oil up from down below. Also blowout preventers, a lot of things that go onto the floating platforms. So that's probably our largest by revenue right now, mostly principally focused in Ghana, Nigeria, and Angola. However, probably as we look the growth is going to be in the power business, in the power generation. We're in, obviously the power needs in Africa are huge. The underinvestment over the years versus the population's needs on electricity is paramount to really getting the growth going. But then you look at our healthcare business, our aviation business. We're on almost every airline in Africa with our aircraft engines. We lease planes to many of the airlines as well. And then we also have our locomotive business, which actually we do assembly here in South Africa, up in Pretoria. So we feel, like all the businesses, and I would say that as far as growth goes, you'll see each one kind of have a different growth pattern and a different size as we continue to.
And a different growth pattern, I would say, in different jurisdictions.
Absolutely. I mean, you have, the power needs in Nigeria are totally different than necessarily the power needs in South Africa. The healthcare needs are different, public sector versus private sector, depending on the country. Same thing, oil and gas is going to be where oil and gas is. So you kind of have that. And I think as countries invest and continue to build their infrastructure, you're going to see different parts of our business grow within specific countries.
It makes your job incredibly difficult. I can understand why you've based yourself in Nairobi, but you've presumably got regional heads that report back to you and are more sort of attuned to the needs of their specific geography.
Our focus is a combination of both. Our regional approach, where we have regional heads in Nigeria, Angola, and South Africa. And then we have the business leaders, which some are located here, some are in Nigeria, some are in East Africa. And so it's a combination of really matching the both. So if you take a country like Mozambique, big potential development from a standpoint of the gas fields that are there, as well as the mining potential amongst a bunch of different minerals. And I think you have to approach it from a strategic standpoint. How would you do it just from each business? But then what's the overarching aspect? How are we going to provide the appropriate local content? How are we going to provide making sure that we have enough skills development within the country, and that's where a broader GE focus would be.
So it's more of a holistic approach.
Yeah, because with a big company like ours, you can do both of bring the businesses in. Some businesses end up being the lead in a country, and then the other businesses follow, and then it may switch for another country. And overall, though, we need to make sure that we have a broader GE approach across all of it.
How has it changed since you've first took up your position? Because it seems to me the very fact that we're sitting here in Cape Town at a World Economic Forum on Africa means that this is an important region, and it seems to be developing almost on a daily basis.
I would say the thing that I'm pleased about is 2 years ago, you'd come to this forum, and they'd be talking about the potential. A billion people, bunch of growth, et cetera, and it's kind of like, okay, we're past that. Let's start to get to execution. Because I think what we need to do is we need to focus in on getting more power, getting better health care, getting the capability of the countries to build their infrastructure, better logistics. Because if we don't get that done, you then have almost a reverse impact of all the demographics end up becoming a threat, not an opportunity. And I think, so now there's a lot of focus here at the WEF around some strategic infrastructure and really figuring out what the processes are that can really get this stuff implemented in a much quicker way.
We'll talk about that in the second part of the show, but before we go to the break, what is the history of GE? It's not in Africa. It's not as if you're a new kid on the block here.
I think it was 1895, GE started in Johannesburg. We were in GE South Africa with pretty much the whole complement of what we did for a number of decades. We then exited during the apartheid years and came back in after '94. And then late 90s, we bought an oil and gas company, Vetco Gray, which really started our real focus in on Nigeria and Angola. And then from there, it's just been a continued growth. So
305,000 employees worldwide. How many in Africa?
A fraction of that, but growing. We're probably up around 2,000 employees. We've grown that, almost doubled that in the last 2 years. I'd say 90 to 95% of those are local Africans. 2/3 of my leadership staff are African, so it's locals. It's not a focus on expats, which we think is very important. So we're going to continue to grow and be a bigger and bigger piece of that 300,000.
It has to be important. I mean, unemployment is, of course, potentially the scourge of Africa. You've spoken about the bulge, the youth bulge, the demographics of Africa. But if that youth bulge is unemployed, then it becomes a drain and it becomes a potential threat to the development of the continent.
Mm-hmm. I think that's the balance that the leaders here have to really strike. Because if you look at what China did, we were in a plastics business. We built a plant on an island up the Pearl River because it was the easiest way to logistically get the stuff out because the roads were a mess at the time. They then focused one of their 5-year plans on infrastructure. Roads are great, airports are great, rail, all of the logistics are great, and we all know what's happened from then. So I think the aspect of investing in infrastructure cannot be underestimated of what the impact is on the economy as it goes forward. If you can move your goods, if you can, get power when you need, that it's going to be there when you need it, and it's not a high-cost diesel generator supplying it, and when you can, you've got healthy employees, all of that stuff really, improves the productivity and then the capability of the country to continue to grow.
And this is where General Electric, of course, comes in, which is why you must be quite excited about the next few years.
Well, we are an infrastructure-focused company, so yeah, we are. And that's one of the reasons we feel great about being here in Africa and what the potential is. And I think it's a balance of really making sure that you balance the risk around operating here and making sure that you do the right investments, but at the same point in time you can get quite a lot of opportunity.
After the break we will talk about the risks of doing business in Africa. Did you come across things that you wouldn't have come across in the other countries that you've represented GE in? I mean, were there things that startled you?
No, I think, my first trip to China was in 1990, so 24 years ago, or 23 years ago, and I've been everywhere. I had been everywhere but Africa, and India, ASEAN, Indonesia back in the 90s. And so, I think what you see, you don't see much different here from that perspective. It's a different environment. You have, I think the biggest thing is you've got in sub-Saharan Africa 48 different countries with 40 in number of different cultures. I always make a joke that there's probably more languages spoken than the number of employees that we have, and with those are cultures, whether they, and I think you've got to understand that if you operate here.